Evening, everyone. It's 6:02. Welcome to this evening's Alameda County Water District Board of Directors. Secretary, please call the roll.
Directors Huang. Here. Sethy.
Here.
Weed.
Here.
Akbari.
Here.
And Gunther.
Here. Well, Director Akbari, lead us to see this evening. Fine, well, this evening is the oath of office. Every couple of years, we have our election. This evening, we'll be swearing in three of us that ran this November. We will do this in quasi seniority order as Director Weed and I challenging all the time. Well, he did beat me in the first election, so I will declare him this evening as senior to me. So we go back on Wednesday. So we'll do Director Weed will go first.
That's great. And so we just want to congratulate our re-elected directors. It is a great occasion this evening. We very much appreciate your service to this district, and we're very, very happy to have the three of you back on this board. We had two directors that were reappointed, having been unopposed in the last election. We had one director, Akbari, who was successful in his re-election. So congratulations to the three of you. And we will do the oath of offices now, just to make sure that you can't change your mind and back out later. We're going to make you swear to it, and we'll start off with Director Weed.
Thank you. Come down.
Yes, please.
Raise your right hand. I, state your name,
John Weed,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, without any mental reservation,
without any mental reservation or nor purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Now, perhaps President Gunther would go have the oath administered. Cool.
I realized when I said Director Weed first, I could. Hopefully.
Please raise your right hand. I
James Gunther,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State.
That I take this obligation freely
Take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation
any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion.
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Last, but certainly not least, Director Akbari. Now, Director Akbari was officially sworn in earlier this evening prior to the board meeting with witnesses that included his wife Sabia and his parents and others here. But since a special ceremonial administration of the oath by his father, Mr. Akbari.
I, Aziz, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
We'll take a quick break here for
Evening. Thank you for joining us tonight at our ACWD board meeting and for the oath of office ceremonies for Director Weed, Director Gunther, and myself. It is an absolute honor and privilege to continue my service on the board of directors at the Alameda County Water District. I'm very grateful for the confidence that the community has placed in me, yet remain humbled by the work that we have ahead of us. I want to take a moment to thank my fellow candidate in this race, Raymond Ojeda, who advocated for the issues that are important to him and to members of our community. Democracy works best when voters get to hear a diverse range of opinions, and I thank Raymond for his courage to stand in this election. I also want to take a moment to thank my fellow board members, Director Sethy and Huang, as well as our dedicated ACWD staff, who I had the pleasure of working with over the past 8 years, and look forward to working with them and fellow re-elected directors over the next term. Throughout my time on this board and over the past 8 years, I have remained focused on the major issues that are affecting our community. I continue to advocate for improvements to our infrastructure by way of ACWD's main renewal program and the investments that we've made to modernize our IT systems. I remain focused on affordability and expanding our loan and rate assistance program so that no family in our district has to decide between putting food on the table and paying their water bill. And I'll continue to push for sound fiscal policies, including turning down our pension and OPEB liabilities, and remain steadfast in our commitment to protect our environment and the life that depends on the same water that we make use of. ACWD must continue to lead on these issues in the state, and we will be a model for a well-run water district and local government agency. The work that we're doing is all in service of our goal to protect our most valuable resource for generations to come. This is a unique responsibility, especially given the challenging times that we're living through with climate change, sea level rise, emerging contaminants of concern like PFAS, seismic risks, economic uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty, and so much more. With these challenges in mind, and with the track record of fighting for the issues that matter to our community most, I hope to provide continued leadership in the next 4 years and to accomplish the goals that we have set.
Okay, now we'll, gonna request that the board take a quick break so we can get some photos. So, think, thanks. Okay, we're back. It's 6:31. Being back, we're going to shift over to public comments for anything that is not anybody present would like to comment on something not on this evening's agenda.
Yes, if you'd like, President Gunther, I could use some quick housekeeping remarks just so everybody kind of understands the best way to interface with the board and the rest of the public this evening. So just in order to do that, I just want to welcome everybody to this evening's board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public present in person who wishes to make comments may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda, staff reports, and presentation materials for this meeting are all available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. President Gunther, that concludes my housekeeping.
Any members of the public, online. We take
And for those online, feel free to raise your hand if you would like to make a comment.
So about 2 weeks ago, the Department of Water Resources issued their annual press release with great fanfare and told everyone that there was a little bit of a shortage of water to the 5% state water project allocation. This has happened several times before, a couple of times in the last 10 years. So I went back and looked up the numbers. Now, if you looked at the pumping from the Delta, you would expect that with a 5% allocation, 5% of 3.4, almost 4 million acre feet, you would be getting less than 200,000 acre feet pumped out of that Delta. But if you look at the last whatever, and you look at several years when they did have an actual 5% allocation, not an estimate for the final year, was they pumped out 750,000 acre feet out of the Delta. Not 200,000, 750,000, which is more like a 20% allocation or something. So how is it that the percentages are so screwed up? they use these legalistic phrases which don't have a strict definition. This is a 5% allocation. It's not 5% of the maximum amount pumped in the realistically pumped in the last, certain fixed period of time historically, whatever, or 5% of our realistic technical capability. It's not 5% of anything. It's 5% of whatever they want it to be. So thanks to the way their lawyers have defined it, it has no real meaning. And there is no, so I'm just here to, first of all, point out that there is no need to panic. 5% allocation doesn't really mean 5%, and the world is not going to end because people are actually getting 20 to 33% of the water that they expect, an average customer maybe, of the state water project. And secondly, there was the cost of the Delta conveyance. They put out this report, and they said that their cost was going to be $1,300 an acre foot, was what it said in their benefit cost benefit analysis. Well, but your accountants said it was $3,000 an acre foot. The ACWD had their own number on their own slides, 3,000. So now let's just do a little envelope calculation to see, should we believe ACWD or should we believe the Department of Water Resources, who we already know are prone to lying? You take they say that they're going to be pumping out 400,000 extra acre feet, 400,000 extra, not the total amount, but the 400,000 extra that they claim to be able to produce from this project someday when it gets finished. So then you multiply that by 3,000, and that would be like a little over $1 billion a year, which would be an annualized cost of capital for a $20 billion amortized cost of capital for the $20 billion project. So that sounds pretty accurate, right? $3,000 an acre foot would actually, it does make sense on the back of the envelope, but $1,300 when you multiply it by would be a tiny amount of money. Would be like $500 million a year or whatever. It's way too little. Way too little. It makes no sense. And it would be a very cheap capital project, which is not. We know it's a $20 billion project. So $1,300 to pump out $1,300 an acre foot to pump out 400,000 acre feet a year is unrealistic. And so the result of the back of the envelope is that the ACWD numbers were more or less kind of okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience like to speak on item nine? Please turn to the yeah, that's.
I get fully on with the ACWD, one residence, one commercial. Every time I got a bill is increasing. And I suggest ACWD to help the people to save the water in their home. Most of the water in the home go for the washing only, taking a shower. And the ACWDs help the people to save the water. They can save in the home, put a drum over there, shower water go to drum, and they can irrigate their plant itself. ACWD have more engineer, more idea. They know much more than me. Secondly, garbage. They say there is some age limit for the seniors. After that, they do not charge the bills to the seniors. Is there a limit for the ACWD also? Age limit? After certain age, there is no bill for the seniors?
If you'd like, we can just briefly respond. So ACWD has a low income rate assistance program. It's not based upon our customers' age, rather their income level. And so we'd certainly be happy to talk to you about enrollment in that program if you or anyone else are interested.
You mean to say,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
you mean to say we should have a low income to save the water bills?
So we also have a lot of programs to help you save water. And we'd be happy to help you with that too. We'd love to talk to you about means of reducing your water use, saving water. So we're happy to help.
No age limit like the seniors,
No, we don't have age-based
age
rates.
45,000?
Well, I don't want to get into too much of a discussion. I'd be happy to leave you my card and we can talk some more.
Okay.
Yeah, as an item's not on the agenda, we're really not able to talk too much about it directly. But I'd love to talk to you.
Mr. Akbari know me very well. He know from business also.
Okay. Let me give you my business card.
Thank you.
Thank you. So.
I don't see hands up online.
No hands up online. Anybody else in the audience to see? Check. Okay, we will move on to consent calendar.
Motion to add items 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, and 5.6 to the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Motion second.
Directors Huang, aye. Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. Moving on,
I will move to adopt the consent calendar as amended. Directors Huang, aye. Sethy,
aye.
Weed,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. We're excited about the organization of board of directors.
We still got a full meeting left.
Yeah, meeting to go. So, item 5.1, reorganization of the board of directors. Simply say which one was first.
Well, let me just read the discussion, just so we get all the context here. California Water Code 30520 provides the Board of Directors shall, 1, elect one of their number president, and 2, may elect one of their number vice president. Pursuant to section 2.2 of the Alameda County Water District Board Rules and Code of Conduct and Resolution 1871 adopted December 10, 1970. This election is typically held at the first regular meeting in December of each year, and that's this evening. The directors who are elected president and vice president assume office at the close of the meeting at which they are elected. The board may consider each resolution separately in 2 actions or together in 1 action. And so staff's recommendation is that the board by motion adopt resolutions electing 1, a president, and 2, a vice president.
I'd like to make a motion, a joint motion to, for the board to elect, Director Huang as president of the board for the next year. And Director Akbari as vice president for the next year.
No, second that motion.
Need a second. Further comments from the board?
I'm looking forward to having you at this end of the board.
This will be agreed. So with that, I'll call for the motion and I'll call for the vote.
Directors Huang, aye. Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. That, now we move on to items.
Congratulations, or perhaps condolences. I think definitely a little bit of both.
Giant gavel will be transferred to Director Huang here.
Are you sure it's safe to do that?
No, actually.
Maybe I should hold that for.
Item 5.2.
Okay, 5.2 is adoption of the 2025 calendar of regular board meetings and board workshops, special board meetings. As you know, the board rules indicate that the board will adopt a regular calendar of meetings and special board meetings. In the board packet is the staff's draft or proposed calendar for regular and special board meetings for 2025. And these meetings are all open to the public. And in order to provide advance notice to the public and to allow board members and staff to plan their annual schedules, staff is proposing the attached schedule of regular board meetings and board workshops, special board meetings for board action. So staff's recommendation is by motion, adopt the proposed 2025 calendar of regular board meetings and special board meetings of the board of directors.
I move to adopt the staff recommendation on item 5.2.
I'll second. Motion second, further comments? You're done. Secretary, please hello.
Directors Huang. Aye. Sethy.
Aye.
Weed.
Aye.
Akbari.
Aye.
And Gunther.
All right. One. Now allow to. We wanted.
You know, it's not his birthday this time, so I think it's totally fine to go ahead and address race and charges. Hopefully, we do want to try and cover this when folks are available, although I think we lost some of the members of our audience, but I think it would be great to do item 5.7.
Okay. Oh, we love it, actually. Item 5.7. Water main.
Yeah, so this is the culmination of an awful lot of work that this board has done since last spring. And we're happy to be at this stage in the process, but we have a little bit more work to do. And to get us started there, I will hand it over to Mr. Wonderly.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, members of the board, staff, and public, and appreciate Jonathan hanging out with us here and learning a little more about our finances. The district's core mission is to provide a reliable supply of high quality water at a reasonable price to the communities of Fremont, Newark, and Union City. And really, to ensure that we can do that, we need to regularly review our finances. And because about 85% of our revenue comes from water rates, that means primarily looking at water rates, as the board did through a series of 5 workshops earlier this year. 2 focused on the district budget, which really establishes the baseline for our expenditure forecast. And then 3 workshops focused on various water rate setting issues. And following all of those workshops, we concluded that a 4% increase in water revenue for each of the next 2 years is required to continue to maintain the financial sufficiency required to reliably operate and maintain the water system. And so within the board packet this evening, we have the staff report, which details the analysis upon which this is based. And we also have available for the public in the board packet a study prepared by our third-party independent financial consultant, HF&H, that goes into much more detail. So that's available within the packet for the public. And so with that overview, we do have a staff presentation this evening that I'll get into. I'll be sharing the presentation this evening with Martin Coran, our senior financial analyst. Mr. Coran is recovering from elbow surgery at home and is joining us remotely. So he'll be presenting the bulk of it and he'll be available on the screen. You can see that it appears that he's in the mountains. He's not. So we'll review all the steps we went through to get to this point in time. And then Mr. Coran will review our financial plan and proposed water rates. Water rates do consist of 4 different components: the commodity charge, the service charge, drought surcharges, and then the rates for dedicated fire service ones referred to as private fire service rates to serve fire sprinkler systems in private developments. And then after Mr. Coran reviews those sections, it'll come back to me to review our miscellaneous fees and charges and facilities connection charges that we traditionally review on the same cycles for water rates. Okay, so what you can see by the small print on this slide is that there's been a lot of engagement on these topics. As I referenced, the 2 workshops on the budget and then 3 workshops in July, August, and September, where we talked about everything from our financial planning to comparisons on our rates to other water districts, the split between fixed and variable charges, some customer service policies, as well as considering tiered rates for residential customers, as well as some other customer class evaluations. And then following all that, direction was given to prepare a 4% uniform rate increase for each of the next 2 years. And so here we are tonight in the second to last item, December 12th, 2024, where the action we'll be asking for is to set the public hearing to formally consider this, which would occur at the regular February board meeting. We've got a number of acronyms that have been defined for everyone's benefit, which I will not go through in detail. And I will now turn it over to Mr. Grant to present the financial plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Can I confirm, if I could see some thumbs up, if everybody can hear me just fine?
You are a tad quiet, Martin, so we're kind of working on that here in the boardroom.
Okay. I will do my best to raise my voice.
I think we're good now. Good now.
You're good to go.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Good evening, members of the board, staff, and the public. My name is Martin Cran, Senior Financial Analyst. So I will be discussing the district's financial plan and the proposed rates and charges. So let's jump right in. So the district's financial planning model assumes the current assumptions listed on the slide above. We start with the approved mid-cycle budget for this current fiscal year 24-25, which includes projected billed demands consistent with water resources projections, continued aggressive contributions to pension and retiree healthcare benefits through June 2032, San Francisco PUC's wholesale water rate increase of 8.8%, which took effect July 1st, 2024, and the fully funded approved capital program. The budget also preliminarily assumed a 5.5% annual rate increase for this year. And following the rate setting workshops with the board, the assumption is now 4%. The further changes that have occurred since budget adoption include the following. So adding $29.1 million of projects identified in the engineering report, issuing debt over the next 5 years of $160 million to fund the capital program, and the proposed water rate adjustments increasing 4% in March 2025 and March 2026, as well as 5% in March 2027, followed by ongoing 4% increases. Now we will look at these assumptions' impacts on the financial planning model over the planning horizon through fiscal year end 2030, assuming 4% increase in water rates effective March 1st, 2025 and March 1st, 2026. So as you can see, the top chart, general fund balances dipped to a low of $1.9 million below the reserve target in fiscal year in 2030. While projected build demands on the bottom chart are projected to increase from 33 million gallons a day this year up to 34.32 million gallons per day from the fiscal years 26 through 2030. This is consistent with water resources projections. So here, the top chart illustrates the district's healthy debt coverage ratio. Adding $160 million in new debt to finance the capital program still leaves the district with a low year debt coverage ratio of 352% in fiscal year end 2029. So we're still maintaining a ratio above district policy of 200%. The bottom chart breaks down capital project funding sources over the planning horizon. And as you can see, the PAYGO general fund, the green portions of the bars through fiscal year end 2030, along with $160 million of debt issuance as the pink portions of the bars. And you notice those pink portions for debt issuance are in fiscal year 25, which is our current fiscal year. 2 years from now, 2027, and then again in 2029. We'll get into a bit more detail as we go along. The next two charts illustrate how the district relies on non-operating revenue to cover operating expenses. That's the top chart. And then the bottom chart shows how the district relies on other funding sources, such as property taxes, bond proceeds, and accumulated reserves, in addition to water rate and charge revenues. So the table above now illustrates how debt would be issued over the next few years and how that impacts the district's debt coverage after the proposed 4% rate increases take effect. Staff is proposing 3 bond issuances. $35 million this fiscal year 25, followed by $55 million in fiscal year 2027, and then $70 million in fiscal year 29, for a total of $160 million. Estimated debt service payments are included in the table above. So while projected debt coverage ratios continue to be above the district's policy target, they are coming down from the nearly 600% projected at the end of the planning horizon at the adoption of the current amended fiscal year 24-25 budget. This next chart shows the total general fund amended budget for fiscal year 25 as approved by the board in June. The solid pieces of the pie show the percentage of labor expenses compared to the shaded portions, which show all other costs. Out of the $186.1 million, labor is 33% of the total budget, which is actually quite low compared to most public agencies. And this is because the district is heavily dependent on third-party water purchases and capital infrastructure. This next pie chart shows how the 4% rate increase is split by cost component. As you can see, 65% of the increase is allocated to operations and maintenance, purchased water, and capital project expenses, with the remaining 35% going towards labor and benefits. The 35% differs slightly from the prior slide because debt service and customer jobs expenses are removed. This next chart shows the breakdown again, except this time in dollars by cost center. So as you can see, the major portion of the increase goes towards source of supply, capital projects, and operations and maintenance. Next, we compare how the district ranks amongst the 30 other Bay Area peer agencies as of June 7th, 2024, based on the average bill and average bi-monthly consumption of 16 units for a standard residential meter. This is the same chart you've seen throughout the rates process. Just showing it again. As you can clearly see, the district ranks fourth most affordable against our comparison agencies, even with the assumed 4% increase effective March 2025. And in fact, even if our comparison agencies didn't change their rates over the next couple of years, the district would still remain fourth most affordable even after applying the 4% increase effective March 2026. This comparison will be updated again early next year to include the most recent changes from our peer agencies. So next we'll move on to proposed rates and charges. Now, the table above shows meter service charges by meter size, from residential 3/4 inch all the way to the major industrial 10-inch meters. The second column shows current charges in effect, followed by the proposed charges increasing 4% effective March 2025 and March 2026. As you can see, for a standard residential 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter, the service charge increases from the current $63.75 to $66.30 in March 2025, and then again to $68.95 in March 2026. Consumption charges are also proposed to increase 4% in March 2025 and March 2026. The current inside district rate is $4.97 per unit, increasing to $5.17 per unit in March 2025, and then $5.38 per unit in March 2026. Private fire service rates are next. They also are proposed to increase 4% over the next couple of years for all meter sizes. And just for example, an 8-inch fire service line currently pays $100.15. That will increase to $104.16 in March 2025 and $108.33 in March 2026. Next up are drought surcharges, which are also proposed to increase 4%. It's important to remind everyone that current water supplies are sufficient to meet normal customer demands, and that these surcharges are not currently in effect. Before drought surcharges can be implemented, the board would have to declare a water shortage emergency at a properly noticed public hearing. The table above identifies the various water shortage stages, associated reduction in water demand, and projected water sales at the various levels of conservation. For example, if a water shortage emergency stage 2A is declared, the district would target 15% reduction in demand. The current approved drought rate per unit at stage 2A is 85 cents a unit. The proposed drought rate effective March 2025 would be increased to 89 cents per unit, and then in March 2026 would be 92 cents per unit. Again, this surcharge can only be implemented by the board declaring a water shortage emergency. So the impact of drought surcharges on a bill are illustrated above. The current total, so commodity rates plus the service charge, current total is $143.27. With the 4% proposed rate increase, the bill would be $149.02 effective March 2025. If the board declared a stage 2 water shortage emergency, for example, the commodity rate would increase 89 cents from $5.17 a unit to $6.06 per unit, resulting in a new total bill of $163.26 if the customer does not conserve. However, if a customer does conserve the 15%, the unit cost is still $6.06, but the customer's bill would be lower at $148.72. This next slide shows the proposed increase impacts for an average single-family residential customer using 16 units bi-monthly. As you can see, the current bill total is $143.27. With the proposed 4% increase effective March 1, 2025, the new total bill would be $149.02, which is an increase of $5.75 per bill, or approximately $2.88 per month, or about 9 cents per day. With the proposed 4% increase effective March 1, 2026, the new total bill would be $155.03, which is an increase of $6.01 per bill, or about $3 a month, or 10 cents per day. So this concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions before I pass it on to Mr. Wunderlich.
Have any questions at this point, or should we continue with the presentation?
We'd be happy to take any questions from members of the public. I see at least a couple of members of the public online. If you have any questions at all, feel free to raise your hand. I'd be happy to address those now. And we can also address further questions in a little bit. Also, as an opportunity for the board to ask any questions of staff based upon the portion of the presentation that we just covered. Okay. All right.
We've been through this a couple of times, so
yeah,
registered all my thoughts and concerns previous meetings.
Yeah.
And my issues are not reflected in the presentation. Or I'll discuss them later as to why our approach is fundamentally flawed. Thank you.
Okay, then Mr. Wunderlich, sounds like it's all yours.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Cran. And I will talk a little bit about miscellaneous fees and charges. Every year we do a comprehensive look at our miscellaneous fees and charges. Those are assessed to cover the cost of the service for which they are imposed. And so those are based on the actual cost, and specifically we always look at the prior year's operational and financial data to determine what those should be. Any fee not included in the presentation this evening is proposed to not change. So no action is required on those. So we do have a few changes to some of our administrative charges. Our field charge, this is when we need to send somebody out to a specific location to increase from $48 to $50. And then for damaged angle stop and locks to increase as shown here from $327 to $347, from $11 to $14. And then the reconnection charges, which always mirrors the field charge because it's based on sending a staff person out to the location, also from $48 to $50. And so those field charge and reconnection charges are going to be based primarily on updates to labor costs as cost of living adjustments are applied for staff. And then the angle stop and lock is mostly going to be based on the cost of the equipment that's associated with that. Section 2, fees and charges to establish water service. We have some updates to our charge for meter installation. And these do come across as fairly substantial, but these are based on the cost of a meter. And what happened is during the course of the AMI project, we had very specific set charges that were negotiated in large bulk with the vendor for several years. And that contract is now expired, and we've had to go out newly to secure these meters, and they are a bit more expensive. Okay, so the next is other fees and charges. So we do have a program where if customers feel that their meter may not be working properly, they can ask to have it tested. They have to make a deposit with that test. As a part of that process to test the meter, we have to remove it. And we have to then install a new meter at that location so they continue to have metered water service while their old meter, now it becomes now their old meter is tested. And because while typically the meters function perfectly fine within those tests, if a customer has gotten to the point of wanting to, kind of contest the accuracy of that meter, generally what we do is we hold on to that and we don't then go back and install it back for another customer, right? Because then you imagine that other customer is thinking, oh, you're giving me a meter that some other customer said didn't work. Right? And so currently, the fees associated with asking for a meter test are very low. And what we're proposing here is to increase them solely to cover the cost of the meter itself. So these amounts do not include any staff labor associated with testing a meter or installing a new meter or anything like that. It's solely the cost of the new meter itself. And if through the testing process, the meter is found to be faulty, this full amount is refunded to the customer. And so I just wanted to give some of that explanation about what's going on here, because these are significant changes from what's currently within our rating fee schedule. This doesn't happen very often. We probably get 20 to 30 of these a year, just kind of estimating based on the revenue associated with this item. And it's almost always at the 3/4 or 1 inch meter. It's usually residential customers, not other customers, but again, somebody with an 8 or 10 inch meter, that's a large industrial type customer. We also have some updates to our hydrant flow test charges, as well as a 1 cent per kilowatt hour reduction in our electric vehicle charging fee, which is following the same pattern as has been used to develop those fees in the past couple of years. And then here, this also relates back to the meter testing when a customer requests that. We currently have some language in our rate and fee schedule about specific parameters about what constitutes passing or failing that. And what we're proposing to do now with this language is simply refer back to the appropriate AWWA standard to determine whether a meter has passed or not. And that's because we have both positive displacement and ultrasonic meters within our system. And the standards are different in terms of what's considered passing or failing the test between these different types of meters. Specifically, there's a larger range for the ultrasonic meters than the positive displacement for considered passing the test. And that summarizes the miscellaneous fees and charges. Earlier this year, the board adopted comprehensive updates to our facilities connection charges. Within that action, it was also planned to do inflationary adjustments for subsequent years. And we have now taken a look at what those inflationary adjustments are based on the July 2023 to July 2024 change in the engineering news record construction cost index for the San Francisco Bay Area. And that is a negative 0.228%. So there will be a very slight reduction in these fees based on the reduction in the construction cost index. And that's shown on these tables. And then here for the different meter sizes for non-residential, broken down by the current and proposed effective, both between the incremental component, buy-in component, and the total amount. So that concludes the presentation on miscellaneous fees and charges and FCCs. We are not asking for any action on that tonight. That will come also in February with the water rates. And so the staff recommendation for this evening is to set February 13th, 2025 at 6 p.m. as the date and time for a public hearing for consideration of the proposed revisions to the district's water-related rates and charges, and to authorize staff to mail notifications to all property owners in the district, customers who are directly responsible for paying the water bill, and all other mailing addresses in the district of the proposed revisions to water-related rates and charges and public hearing details. So that, I guess we'll stop there and take any more questions, and then following the discussion here, then I can review the next steps.
I have a question, which is, how often do we get questions from commercial customers or industry about these special fees and charges?
We get some engagement from the Building Industry Association when we're doing a study on the facilities connection charges. So that's usually every 5 years. But in the intervening years, I know we send, we'll mail a notice to them of the proposed fees for the upcoming years, and that will go out to the developers and cities and planning departments. I don't believe we get substantial interaction with them other than maybe any kind of clarifying questions and wanting to make sure they understand what the charges are. Certainly with a year like this where it's a slight reduction and from the inflationary adjustment, I think we should expect minimal feedback.
I recall the building association has appeared before them.
Correct, and that's when we do a comprehensive study, we do proactively reach out to them and offer them the opportunity to engage with staff as we go through the study process, and they tend to be interested in doing that and provide us some feedback along the way. But in the intervening years, when it's just the inflationary adjustment, we haven't really had any meaningful interaction with them.
So you're aware of it. Every time we go through the race process, I've been a longtime member of the Fremont Chamber of Commerce, and I served most of those years on the Government Affairs Committee, where we do have developers, building contractors that are involved. So I usually try to give them an update every time we prove something. They do ask questions there. Sometimes I've had a staff person come with me for the presentation. Usually I just hand off the materials, which I'll do again. That staff person, by the way, was Bob Shaver. Shouldn't call him staff.
About 5 years ago, the staff presented us with a chart that showed where the money for the rate increase was going. What percentage of it would be used on service, was demand cost demands, and what percent would be on commodity increases. At that time, over 90% of the rate increases, I recall, was going to be going to service-related costs, not 10% to commodities. And yet, the rates themselves are 2/3 commodity and 1/3 service. Even that is an doesn't come near to meeting, having us meet our fixed costs with fixed income and variable costs with variable income. In the current year, or the year that just passed, we had an operating deficit. Because the year prior to that, we had almost $11 million from a conservation surcharge. We call it drought. Truth is, it's conservation. People cut back on their water supply. This is not a responsible way to run any enterprise district. And we continue it. We're much better off than we once were. We're less than 9% service and 91% commodity, with almost an inverse in the actual cost. So when you cannot predict what your income is going to be, because you don't match variable cost or variable income and fixed cost or fixed income, for applying line, you have to carry greater margins than are necessary. Greater reserves are beneficial. And it's so easy to fix. Solution? Cut the commodity cost in half and double the service charge. It'd be so much easier to deal and then put the service charge on the property tax statement. Maybe we'll get there someday, but we're not showing progress. Thank you.
I'm not gonna relitigate the issues that we've been through over the last year as we've been talking about the rates. One quick question that I did have related to the AMI project. When we were making bulk purchases of the meters, did we purchase any extra to take advantage of that highly discounted price that we had at that time?
Yeah, so I think there was a set quantity within that project. And so we purchased, that quantity. And, that price was set like 5 years ago when that contract was bid. So I think, we've kind of exhausted what's available there.
Apart from that, I think none of the information presented tonight is new to the board. So I don't have any additional already registered.
I do have a question. I was actually looking for one of the charges and that's not here. I think we had this discussion before, which is the meter reading cost for our customers that decline to use the AMI meter. So is that charge or fee, however we want to characterize it, would that show up later?
So that was previously approved by the board a few months ago when that item was presented. It has not yet been imposed on any customer. And so it's not proposed to change. It will change as we get experience with doing this and get kind of the final count and how we're able to do it. It is our goal to do that in the most efficient way that we can, such that we're trying to provide the best service we can to these customers. We're actually just about, we're kind of just this close to getting some letters out to these customers to let them know that they're going to start being responsible for this obligation unless they are okay with us coming out and installing the AMI meter.
Okay. So the follow-up question is, why is it not part of this rating charges and fees package? Right, I would prefer we have a published chart or one location for our customers to look up fees.
No, it is a part of the rate and fee schedule. So,
Okay.
But all that's been presented this evening is fees that we are proposing to change.
I see.
There are
Okay.
many fees, including this one, but also many others that we're proposing to not change, and they were not included in this evening's presentation.
Okay, thank you.
As been said earlier, we've gone over this now for several months, multiple meetings. And we do have differing opinions among directors on the board. However, the majority of the board has gone this direction. I would like to say, my last bill was, I think, about 64% service charge, based on my water use. So, it's an interesting topic. It comes up frequently, and we've all spoken on that. I'm not going to speak on it any further. I'm satisfied where we are, and I think our rates are perfectly fine. I support the item. Hearing any further discussions, do we have any comments from the public before we take this to a vote?
Seeing no hands raised online and no members of the public here in the boardroom.
We have a staff recommendation. Do I have a proposal?
Make the motion to adopt staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Motion to second. Comments, Secretary, please call the roll.
Directors Huang. Aye. Sethy.
Aye.
Weed.
No.
Akbari. And Gunther.
Aye.
And before we move on to the next agenda item, now that the board has authorized us to proceed, I'll just quickly recap the next steps. December 30th is our deadline to send the Proposition 218 notices out so that we can have the public hearing on February 13th. We have a 45-day notification requirement. Currently, we expect that we'll be able to do that about a week ahead of that deadline. We have scheduled a community meeting January 28th that will be in person at the Newark Library. And then we will cover the same material again in a virtual community meeting January 30th. As we get closer to those dates, we can ping the board in terms of your interest in attending, so we'll know if it needs to be a noticed board meeting or not. The public hearing will now occur February 13th. And then most of these rates and charges, if approved, would become effective March 1st of 2025. However, the development-related fees and charges, which are specifically the FCCs and the meter installation charges, there's a 60-day waiting period on imposition of changes to those fees. So those will become effective May 1st, 2025. And that concludes staff's presentation on this item.
President Gunther, may I make a comment? Sure. On topic? The density of development continues to increase. The city of Fremont has no longer discusses for their urban areas the number of units per acre, whether for area ratio, and then the developer is allowed to put as many units into that as they can. The time is just, and it was noted that the water district does have a dormitory rate. But as I'm looking at the chart here, we do have a dormitory rate, and slide 31. And it's $7,500 for a single family, incremental cost component, $6,300 for multiple dwelling. That's only 2 or more. When you get to the most recent development, I call them the Capitol Avenue tenement, 126 units to the acre, 8 stories. It would be interesting to do an analysis of what the water consumption is when we go from, say, a couple of units to when you're talking about that many units per acre. And is there a dramatic drop? And maybe we take a look at a high density residential / dormitory rate. Thank you.
I would encourage us to do the same study.
Okay. Moving on to 5.8.
Okay, 5.8, we're gonna keep it with Mr. Wunderlich to talk about authorization of amendment to agreement for customer portal services, including merchant card processing and enhanced chat functionality.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. As part of the Advanced Metering Infrastructure Project, a customer portal, My Smart Water Connect, was implemented to provide district customers with access to their water consumption data, as well as enhanced customer service features. For example, customers can apply for help on tap or apply for water use efficiency rebates through the portal. After several years of experience with the portal, staff have identified multiple options to improve the customer experience by having payment processing performed by the portal vendor and adding chatbot functionality. And specifically now we have a separate vendor that works behind the scenes that we had in place before the AMI project that does the technical payment processing, and that creates some inefficiencies having those multiple vendors involved in that process. And then in terms of the chatbot functionality, customers today can chat with a live agent during business hours, but outside of business hours, there's no availability of this service. And so what we would be looking at there is that customers during business hours would continue to have immediate and direct access to live agents, but would have the ability to receive service through a chatbot after hours, as well as during business hours if that was the customer's preference. And so there's adequate funding in the approved 2-year budget for this expenditure, and future budgets will include the amounts necessary to maintain the ongoing cost. This item was reviewed with the Finance and Administration Committee meeting last month. And board approval will help meet several district strategic initiatives, including investing in system improvements to increase customer water use efficiency and engagement, and promoting financial transparency, as well as enhancing our outreach and engagement. So the recommendation is by motion, authorize the general manager to amend agreement number 4455 with Smart Energy Systems, doing business with Smart Energy Water, provide electronic payment and merchant card services based on established per transaction fees and the required interchange fees, specifically with no cumulative dollar limit for this subset of services. That is the nature of the current contract, because the actual cost is contingent on customer use of these services, as well as provide for enhanced chatbot functionality in an amount not to exceed $287,500 over the remaining 7.5 years on the Smart Energy Water contract. So we're not proposing any time extension of the current contract with Smart Energy Water, simply adding some of these services under the umbrella of the current contract. And so with that presentation, I'd be happy to take any questions.
I'll just put forward a motion to approve the staff recommendation on 5.8. I found the presentation in the Finance Committee quite enlightening. And so I'm very supportive of this move by the district.
I'll second. Motion is second. Further comments? I'm supportive. I'm curious. One thing I would like to see is, if possible, number of people actually, I think it has to be, because it looks like we're charged on that, number of uses of this after-hour program. Just for, well.
AI chat instances.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See
so
some data on that.
yeah, we'll see if we can get data on that. We do know that over the past year, this was reviewed with the committee. Unfortunately, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I believe we had several thousand attempts to initiate a chat after hours over the past year, and we've been unable to engage because it's only available during business hours with a live agent.
Interesting. Be very interesting to see the results.
So that would be probably an upper bound of the potential use of this after hours.
Be a great benefit. We have a motion and a second. Secretary call the roll.
Directors Huang? Aye. Sethy?
Aye.
Weed?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye.
So item 6.1 is board committee reports. Staff wasn't planning to review any items in particular, but certainly we stand ready to address any questions from the board.
Operational reports. It's raining.
This rainfall report in the board packet is not going to reflect this evening's rainfall.
We'll get a little more tomorrow. Hardest map is the hardest map. It still looks all right. Then we got 6.3.1.
All right, now we get to bring along Jonathan Clay, who's been patiently waiting and just raring to go. Jonathan Clay, of course, from JGC Government Consulting Services. He's our legislative consultant in Sacramento, and is a great friend to the LICA committee because he's constantly sharing good information throughout the year. But he's here for this evening to share his annual report to the full board of directors. So, Jonathan, here's Johnny. It's all yours.
I'll try not to bang through any walls or doors there. Good evening, President Gunther, board members, Jonathan Clay, I'm your lobbyist here in Sacramento. just want to say that, on behalf of both Aaron and myself, we really greatly appreciate being able to be here tonight and also appreciate being able to represent the district in Sacramento. This has been a very dynamic year in Sacramento, for 2024, and between a fairly significant budget deficit that the legislature, bridged the gap on, and I will be the first to admit that I was wrong. I felt that we were kicking the can down the road, and most recently, the legislative analyst, which is sort of the independent advisor to the legislature, has projected that the fiscal year 25-26 shall probably be a pretty balanced budget. It's coming in about neutral. And I would have guessed that we kicked a few cans and we're not going to be in that boat. Now, future years in 26-27, they're projecting double-digit deficits, but I think that's good news given that roughly, I think the LAO's projection was the last year's deficit was around 55 billion. So a very significant number. The legislature is carrying forward still a fair amount in reserves. So I think that will take a little bit of pressure off of the legislature in terms of how they're kind of trying to juggle financial matters. But the dynamics of this year also have to relate of just the politics of the legislature itself. We had kind of a whipsawing of a governor that was thinking he might be running for president at one point and then wasn't. And that dynamic really did, I think, carry over into what policies were moving forward through the process because folks were very much looking at it through a lens of how the rest of the nation would view some of these things. And you saw that come through loud and clear in a lot of the signings and the vetoes that the governor did back in September. Also in the dynamics, I would say this year, the end of the legislative session in August was one of the more dysfunctional ones I've experienced in a while, where traditionally everyone thinks it's a Democrat versus Republican, and they gloss over that some of the more nasty fights are actually between the two houses, between the Senate and the Assembly. And one of the bills that we, as the district, had been supporting, it was a priority for the state water project related to SB 1390, related to flood flows and how you tried to ensure that the interests of the state water project were protected while also balancing the policies that the governor and others wanted to address with dealing with flood waters and how to put that to beneficial use. That bill died in the Assembly. Not because of, well, there was opposition to the policy, but really because there was politics between the two houses. The Assembly sat on the bill, and we just ran out of time to actually try and get it back to the Senate for a final concurrence vote. And so, hoping that this next year will avoid some of that, but that's just one example of a whole host of kind of bills that just didn't make it through the process because of just fighting between the two houses. Moving forward, kind of looking into the next year, I don't know if I would say I see a lot of big water bills coming from within the water community. I think external forces may be driving some of that. I will say water affordability will be back again. That bill had failed in the Assembly Appropriations Committee this year. Having talked to the sponsor, they are very keen on getting something done, and they will be coming back next year. And as you all know, the district has their own robust program, and there were some behind-the-scenes conversations between ourselves and the sponsors of that bill, trying to understand how what they were trying to do through the legislation would work, mesh up with what ACWD is worked very hard to build here at the local level. So I definitely see that coming back down the pipe. I think you will also see a lot of reactionary. I think that's the best way to describe it. As with the new administration coming in at the federal level, we're going to see a host of things. You've already seen it with the governor having called a special session to appropriate money to fight what they anticipate will be actions from the new administration. I think we'll see that as well on drinking water standards, water quality, just a whole host of things. Having talked to some of the folks in the environmental community, even before the election, there were folks that were preparing that if there was a change in administration, that they would need to try and do things to protect California's standards versus what could be rollbacks at the federal level. I think that's going to be the biggest unknown for us in California. Trying to thread the needle lightly here. As California decides to try and jump into being fighting the new administration on a host of fronts, that could reverberate back in terms of withholding of money, other things. I think from just looking at a big picture, there's not anything that is directly related, I would say, to ACWD or on the water side. The biggest exposure that the state has if they were to pick a fight with the federal government is really going to be on the health and human services side, Medicaid, Medi-Cal. There's a whole host of waivers that the state has from the federal government on various healthcare things, and I could see the new administration pulling back on some of that, which could then force the state have to relook at budget priorities. Aside from the healthcare side, Governor Newsom's already made it clear that if the federal government pulls back on some of the EV rebates, that California will jump in and provide those. I'm not sure with what money, but that'll be an interesting kind of dialogue. But I highlight that at least as it relates to water, there's not a direct correlation, but there will be things that could reverberate from other decisions that could impact the district. With the passage of the water bond, I think we'll see that move through. It'll be interesting to see what the governor puts in his January budget proposal, which we hear is going to come pretty early in January. But that money could be starting to flow out the door to the various state agencies starting in the fiscal year 25-26 budget cycle. So I think that's going to be something that we're already internally amongst ACWD staff talking about, like, where can we compete for programs, what money can we go after, et cetera. So another thing to kind of keep on our radar for the year ahead. Going back to the change in administration, I do think things to keep an eye on are going to be what happens on the Colorado River. Again, nothing that is directly related to ACWD, but if there's any changes, curtailments on the Colorado River, that puts more pressure on water moving through the Delta. And then as it relates to the Delta, the state just recently moved forward with its operating rules for the State Water Project. They were immediately sued, so that's in court. We'll see what the new administration does as it relates to the federal operations. You probably remember at the end of the first Trump administration, the state was suing the feds over the disagreement on those operating agreements between the state and the federal project. When you really looked at it, there wasn't a lot of difference between the two plans. So, and I think my understanding is that's the same now. It's the politics. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to have a lot of politics wagging the policy for the next 4 years. So, back at the state level, one and another thing that's kind of going on behind the scenes that still hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but in the July budget, the state imposed hiring freezes and mandatory reduction. We hear that that's going to continue on in the next budget cycle. And for example, State Water Board has had numerous impacts to their various programs because of this freeze. And it has to do with how Department of Finance is looking at what's your general fund versus all the funds that come into the federal government. So I think that's also something as a water agency we're going to have to contend with, that working with the state is going to take longer. It's going to be harder to get things out of them because they're really trying to freeze, contract some of these state agencies. Doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's definitely something that we're going to be seeing here. Then kind of finally, just as we've just had the new legislative session start last Monday, the final group of new legislators under term limits have come in. I think we're going to have a pretty stable group of folks through at least about 2030, not a lot of turnover like we've had in the last couple election cycles. With that, we're going to start seeing new committee makeups coming out, hopefully by Christmas, but for sure by the end of the new year. They come back on January 6th. I do wonder if we're gonna see any changes in leadership in the two houses, maybe more quickly on the Senate side, given that Pro Tem McGuire is now running, I think, for insurance commissioner. And once you kind of make the announcement that you're running for your next office, then everyone's fighting at the bit to try and become the next leader. So, but with both houses had losses on the Democratic side, Republicans picked up some seats. And so I do wonder if that creates a little bit of tension for leadership. So I think that is kind of a quick little overview, and I will stop there and open it up for questions or comments.
Alright. So I was reading that they were going to try to initiate state layoffs across multiple departments in the tens of thousands. Was it 10 or 20,000?
So I don't think they're doing layoffs, but I think what they're doing is freezing all vacancies and which happened, I think that's about the 10,000 number. So that, and also having a reduction of 10%, which is part of that the freezing of any open vacancies.
I asked that just for clarification. The one thing I heard repeatedly at Aqua was the need for, there was a lot of talk about the water bond and what was in it. And it was everything but the kitchen sink, you know.
It's probably better to not call it a water bond. We should more call it a climate resiliency bond, because I think roughly only about a third of it at best might be directly water.
Right. And were you out, by the way?
I was not this year. Had some family things come up last week and then decided not to go to Aqua this
Okay,
year.
I'm asking because I don't know if you heard conversations going on, but the one thing that came out loud and clear was that we need an aging infrastructure water bond that is solely focused on aging infrastructure. And so there's going to be discussion in Aqua now to get input from different committees on what could go into such a bond. And I really feel that that is desperately needed in California. And so you can help assert our
Most definitely.
for that. We really need it, and it's not a $10 billion bond. We need something like 25 billion to get started with.
And that is part of the pull and tug, and that was part of the issue that came up with all the bonds that were considered this year on the education side, this climate resiliency bond. You probably remember, hopefully I'm not misspeaking, I don't believe Aqua weighed in on the bond. Once it was finally in, the final dollar amount was unveiled at the end of session. A number of water agencies did not actually engage in support, very big ones, including Aqua, just because I think there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the final direction of where things landed. And to be completely honest, I think if the water community is going to try and approach something from a sort of an aging infrastructure replacement and rehab, I think you may have to go back into time and look at some of the initiative-driven bonds that, from like the mid-2000s, early 2000s, that were not put forward by the legislature, but were put forward via the initiative process to be able to get a more, I wouldn't call it clean, but a more narrow package that's focused on that.
I think one of the reasons the Jerry Merrill initiative failed was for similar reasons, and plus the economic environment too. But the other thing I heard was with the incoming Trump administration, we might actually get some movement on raising Shasta Dam. Senator Dianne Feinstein was really one of the most ardent advocates for that.
I think the problem they're gonna have on a raising a Shasta Dam is this this goes way back into the Wayback Machine, but there was legislation done, and you can see the senator's face, this is early 2000s, that designated the McCloud River as a protected river. And the problem you have, if I remember this correctly, and anyone else wants to throw me a lifeline here, but once you raise the Shasta Dam, you're actually backing water up into the McCloud.
Tribal areas.
Yep, and so I think that would be, it'll be interesting. I think big picture, setting aside specifics on the Shasta Dam, I think what will be an interesting dynamic in 2025 is there may be things that come out of this new presidential administration that folks within the water community are going to like in terms of helping try and do new water development that's going to put us very much at odds with some of the environmental community that we may have worked hand in hand with on other projects.
Right, right.
And so I think we could have some awkward conversations amongst our friends.
Dianne Feinstein was one of the few Democratic senators that actually aligned herself with the Republicans in regard to Shasta. And Shasta was built with the thought in mind, was engineered so it could be raised further.
Right.
Coming out of the Depression.
And I'm forgetting on the senator's name, I can see his face, but that was a whole fight in the early 2000s, and they specifically did something, a designation on the McCloud River that makes it very difficult to do. From at least the state level.
I have a report to give later, but I'll give a portion of it right now. I went to the Mountain Counties Water Resources Association conference at Cameron Park 3 weeks ago. And our guest speaker in the morning was Congressman Tom McClintock. And he gave a very extensive presentation. Between his presentation and Q&A, it was an hour time. And he was very much advocating for the raise on Shasta and talking about all the other failed water projects in his mind that are being held up by environmentalists. He was very much pro Delta conveyance. He gave a really wonderful presentation. I actually agreed with a lot of what he had to say. But he was talking to his own constituents too, in a Republican, largely Republican district. It was very interesting.
And just remember the senator's name, Byron Scheer, Senator Byron Scheer, is the one to carry that legislation.
That's it for me.
They used a line that we don't, Wayne Dortsky said you don't pay where the buck is, you look at where it might be going. Have you picked up any deal legislature in Sacramento that there may be an effort to prevent, restrict the amount of water that we can bank and transfer from agriculture to coastal urban?
No, I haven't. In terms of like dryer transfers, like the agri-urban purchases, is that what you're talking about?
It's been 25 years since the Monterey Storm. There was a Cat's bill that came in to try and cement that, but it got killed by the ag interests. So we've been kind of in a no man's land here for a while, and then no one's initiated. We're finding some districts going out and acquiring agricultural land, Vine Ranch buying 2,000 acres in the San Joaquin Valley so they can control the groundwater bank. Our major water groundwater supplier, Semi-Tropic, is being challenged in their approach and review. That contract ends in 2034. So one suggestion was, rather than look, in addition to looking at state water, look at federal water and see if there might be an opportunity to access federal water that we can import. Valley Water has the ability to bring 75,000 acre feet of federal water down the south of the aqueduct each year, and is using about half of that capacity. So I would just leave open that options for, as you're listening to these things, that there might be some opportunity for us to expand our portfolio. And I feel that we got the wherewithal to purchase the land in our water banking rather than being tenants. LA's got a valley. There's no reason we might be.
there was an interesting bill, and I'm trying to remember, everything kind of blurs together. I think it was actually last year that Assemblymember Bauer Cahan related to private equity firms going in and buying up property, kind of like as you were describing.
Silvertip is a company which is actively acquiring water rights, so.
And there was a bit of a discussion there of, because a bunch of the public water agencies were also looking at this and concerned about it. The bill ended up kind of dissipating, but that's the kind of, just off the top of my head, the only thing I'd really kind of heard, seen, and I don't know if there's really a groundswell one way or the other to revisit that, but that's the closest I've seen to some discussion around that in the last 2 years.
Thank you.
I'm always peppering you with questions, like a committee meeting. I'll take advantage of that next week again, when we meet. But I just wanted to say, you harped on the fact that this legislative year was unique. I think was one of the words you used. And it sounded so. I mean, especially as we got to the end of session, it was, there was a lot of infighting between both chambers, a lot of bills that didn't make it through because of more personal quarrels, it felt. One of the things that I've appreciated, having served on my committee for a few years now, I feel like we get kind of a steady hand with you, get a very clear sense of what's actually going on. Not just with bills, but also with personalities and kind of internal politics as well. So I just wanted to say today, like, I very much appreciate that work that you do for the district, and the reports that you give us on a monthly basis are very, very fascinating. I know I'm coming up with questions left field, but you always entertain them, and it's very.
It's our pleasure. It's always kind of a delicate balance of how deep into the weeds and water walk you get into all this stuff. But we always try and give you just a sense of the politics, because, I mean, as anyone knows, I mean, it would be a lovely world if it was always just pure policy, that you could just move things on the merits alone, and that's not the case. And I definitely think this next year we may see a lot more politics at play as it relates to how things move through the process. But on the flip side, now that we have a bunch of new members that are going to be there for a while, I do think we may see a little more stabilizing. I think leaders getting into the second year of their term may have a better handle on how to manage some of those inner house dynamics. And so my fingers crossed, we'll have a much less of a dysfunctional end of session next year.
For the sake of the state, I hope
Yes.
so. And then finally, I just wanted to pass along my appreciation to Aaron as well, because Aaron is always answering a lot of questions from us as well. So just wanted to express my.
I like to always say Aaron is definitely the brains of the operation, and he keeps me aimed in the right direction all the time. So Aaron and I now have the pleasure of working together. Gosh, I guess it's going on like 22 years. So we definitely hope that we're able, between the two of us and our experience and knowledge, to be able to give you guys just good representation and a good kind of understanding of this crazy world that we live and work in over in Sacramento.
It goes a long way for me. So very much appreciate it. And also, I just always forget how tall you are.
We were just having this conversation. I shared the story that earlier this year, one of our clients we represent, the executive director had come on during the pandemic, and so we never actually met in person. And she came for an in-person meeting in her office earlier this year. She walks in the door, and I stand up to introduce myself, and it was just funny, her reaction, because she had no clue how tall I was, given all these Zoom meetings we've been on. And here's all 6'7" of me standing up. She's like, "Whoa, you're really tall."
You look so small on the screen.
I know, exactly. I just looked at the mirror.
Just one quick note for our LICA committee. We are actually planning to give JGC the week off next week. just because we don't expect a whole lot to change between this evening and next week. But if something does, we'll be sure to provide that update. And of course, Jonathan and Aaron are not only available monthly or yearly, they're obviously engaged with the district all year long. So if there's ever any questions, feel free to.
Well, I will echo and I totally agree with what Director Akbari said. It definitely has been a pleasure being on the LICA committee and about these discussions and updates from you and Aaron. So thank you to both of you. But I think the most valuable service you provide to the district and our customers, in addition to just following the bills and help us work through issues, is the fact that you actually gives us a heads up. The most valuable thing is actually not the bill that's published or proposed, is what's discussed in the hallway about what's potentially coming down, right, that would affect our district. I really definitely appreciate the fact that you'll give us a heads up saying, hey, I heard this is coming, that could potentially impact the district, affect our customers. So that service is definitely invaluable to us, in addition to help us perhaps shepherd and shape some of the bills that we're interested in. So thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Jonathan, it's going to be an interesting year. I wonder if, the governor will continue his center bent. Question is he still running for president? Perhaps. We'll see. I think he was before. Which is good for us, I think, personally. I also find it intriguing what may come with the Trump administration. In that, infrastructure, water, I think those could be positive points. We'll see. I think it'll be interesting up there in Sacramento, watching that unfold. It's going way off the rails too. You never know. Hopefully it won't. Looking forward to another year. Thank you. Thank you for everything you do for us up there.
Well, thank you, Jonathan.
Well, thank you all for the kind words.
I didn't extend my appreciation. President Gunther, I would like to request a break for a few minutes.
Absolutely. You think 5 after?
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Oh, that's it.
Go back.
Okay, word is back from the break, and we're moving on now to item 6.32.
That's right. One other staff presentation this evening. It's an update on our 2025 water supply outlook and also fish passage facilities operations. And we're happy to have acting director of water resources this evening, Mr. Leonard Ash, who happens to know a little bit about this stuff. Hello, Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson, and good evening, members of the board. The presentation tonight is in 2 different parts. The first portion of the presentation will be an update on the 2025 water supply outlook, and then the second portion will refer to our fish passage facility operations. Okay, so I'll start with an update on our local rainfall, and clearly, as this meeting continues, this number is changing. But as of this morning, we received 0.6 inches of local rainfall so far in December. So the current total as of this morning was 2.8 inches so far this water year. And you can see that that's highly dependent on the atmospheric river event that we had in November. Similarly, for the Northern Sierra 8-station precipitation index, the main takeaway here is that also this index is above average for this time of year, 120% above average as of today at 14.4 inches. Also, mostly due to that atmospheric river event that we experienced in November. Now, if you take a look statewide at reservoir conditions, this is a very difficult table to see in aggregate, but the main point here is that the main reservoirs for our imported supplies are all at or above average storage levels for this time of year. So Oroville is 56% full as of today, 108% of average for this time of year. Don Pedro, 69% full, which is 103% of average for this time of year. And San Luis Reservoir, 65% full, which is 118% of average for this time of year. Looking at the forecast right now, for the near term, we expect an increased probability of above normal temperatures, as well as near normal precipitation. But if you look at these two graphs provided by NOAA, you'll see that overall for December, there's an increased probability for below normal precipitation. And looking at the December, January, and February 3-month outlook, it improves with conditions likely near equal chances of above or below for that 3-month period. So a dry start to the winter with promising changes coming up in the months ahead. However, there are some portions of the state that are experiencing drought right now, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. That's predominantly in the southeastern part of the state, where we have about 5% of the state in a severe drought currently, with about 1% of the state in extreme drought. However, about 44% of the state is not experiencing any drought at all right now, and another 40% is just abnormally dry. Again, the U.S. Drought Monitor, as I mentioned to the board every time I show this graph, is one indication and is predominantly skewed towards agricultural interests, but it is one indicator that we look at for potentially drying conditions around the state. So currently, as was mentioned earlier in the report for groundwater, we do have healthy levels of local groundwater conditions in our basins. Lake Del Valle, which is operated by DWR, has been lowered in advance of the winter runoff event, so there's plenty of capacity for any storm events that come. And then the SFPUC has sufficient water supplies to meet their wholesale and retail customer demands for the 2025 year. And as was mentioned earlier, on December 2nd, DWR announced its initial allocation of a 5% Table A allocation. That's the new water supplies for the State Water Project for 2025. And while that does sound very small, just as a reminder here with this graph, in orange you can see the allocations from DWR for 2023, which started off at 5% in December of 2022. And it was an extremely wet year. We ended up with a 100% Table A allocation. Last year, DWR started off the year December 2023 with a 10% allocation, and with an average to slightly above average water year, we ended at a 40% allocation for the state project. So 5% allocation is not a whole lot of water for the district, but it's not the end of the road. We expect that number will go up. So from a water supply planning perspective, unlike the reflection you see here in Shin Pond, we don't have a whole lot of clarity of what will happen for this water year. However, we are seeing indications that it's more likely than not to improve. We may see something closer to an average water year, and we'll get more information as the year progresses. We mentioned in our update to the Water Resources and Conservation Committee in October about our prioritization of operations of our water supplies. And so we'll continue those baseline operations similar to how we reviewed it in the October committee meeting, prioritizing the use of local water first, and then if it does look like it will be dry, increasing our imported water activities as needed. But due to low customer demands and the sufficient water supplies that we have available, the district supplies can meet our anticipated 2025 demands, and that's even with this 5% allocation. Obviously, if the state project allocation stays at 5% or decreases, that's an indication things are bad all across the state, in which case perhaps the customer demands may not be what we predict right now. But all that being said, we're feeling very comfortable with our water supplies that we have in storage, as well as our imported supplies that we can call upon this year. So we're starting off okay. Now I want to transition to a very brief update on our fish package operations, and there are greater details of these operations in the report for the November Water Resources and Conservation Committee. So I'll refer you to those minutes for additional slides and information if you're so interested. Just as a reminder for the board, for our fish passage operations, we're primarily focused on that central California coast steelhead, and the migration seasons for that species, the immigration season is January through March, and the emigration season or the out-migration season is the months of April and May. And so in 2024, the RD1 fish ladder operated 141 out of the 152 days of those two migration seasons. And so that was a 92% efficiency rate of our ability to operate those ladders during that time. If you'll recall, during our first year of operations in 2023, given the excessive runoff and high flows that we were seeing in Alameda Creek, we didn't approach anywhere close to 92%. So we operated the ladders significantly more of the migration seasons, and I'll get into the impact of that with some subsequent slides here. So for our pit tag detections, I'm very happy to report that we detected 51 unique pit tags in our antenna loops that are within the RD1 fish ladder. That's up from 1 that we got in all of 2023. And out of those 51, if you recall, we do have 2 sets of antenna loops. So if a out-migrating fish passes and is detected through both of those sets of antennas, we're able to pick up directionality. And so out of the 51, 37 of them were detected in both sets of loops. So we were able to confirm that they were moving in the out-migration or the downstream direction. So an indication that they were as expected out-migrating juvenile tag Omicus. We continue to make improvements this past year with our second piece of biological monitor equipment, which is the sonar camera that's also installed in the RD1 fish ladder. That sonar camera you can see in the photo here, it's roughly the size of a loaf of bread, and it picks up imagery of fish moving through the ladder. During our first year of operations, we were still making some safety improvements on how to safely enter the ladder to perform needed maintenance on that piece of equipment. So we made improvements in 2024 where we've been able to go into the ladder even during the migration season. So while there's a full impoundment, while the RD1 dam is up, to safely close off the ladder for flows and have staff enter the ladder to make to perform maintenance on that equipment. As well as during the off season, just as we did in 2023, to go into the ladder, remove the equipment and send it back to the manufacturer for any maintenance. Because we were able to maintain the camera more effectively in our second year of operation, and here, actually for this slide, just very quickly, just to give you an indication of why the camera needs maintenance, you can see on the left the before, that was the in situ condition in April. So after about 4 months of water running around and through the camera itself, some of that sediment that was in the water was deposited within the camera and behind the lens. This particular camera has ports on the side of it, so the entire camera is submerged in water, and water is part of the cooling mechanism for the camera itself. So there's water actually flowing through the piece of equipment. And because of that design, there is sediment that builds up within the equipment itself. So the equipment needs to be opened up, rinsed out, and you can see on the right, the after photo shows you what a clean sonar camera lens looks like. So because of those operations, we got better quality video. We were able to monitor our video quality throughout the migration seasons. And as we saw that sediment build up through degrading video quality, sort of grainier video quality, we scheduled that entry so that throughout the entire migration season, we were able to keep that quality of video much higher than it was the first year. So because the ladder was operating a lot longer during the migration season, and because we were getting very high quality video, that creates quite a bit of workload for our fisheries biologist consultant. And if you recall, the significant portion of their contract is just watching the video that we capture with that sonar camera. So now they have a lot more of it, and it's a lot better quality. So to assist in the analysis of all that additional video footage, we are implementing a new software application, a hydroacoustic data processing software application. Basically, that's just it's a very smart piece of programming that watches the video, identifies movement in the video that potentially could be fish, and flags it then for human intervention to go back and validate that. And we're continuing to work with our fisheries biologist consultant to sort of train that application to better identify fish, separate it out from debris or bubbles that might be in the water that would affect the video quality. So I just wanted to provide you in this slide with 3 still shots of some examples of that sonar imagery. On the left, you'll see one potential salmonid fish. In the center photo, you'll see 2. And on the right, in that gray imagery, you'll see a lamprey. It's a little difficult to see. Let me see if I can do it. Lamprey is roughly between the 2 and 3 meter mark. So we were able to identify multiple species of fish, especially Pacific lamprey that you see on the right is also a species of concern that the fish ladder was specifically designed to accommodate for its migration through the fish ladder. So in summary, staff has been working to optimize our diversion operations for water supply, while also maintaining compliance with our permits for fish passage operations. We're continuing to recover from the excessive runoff that we experienced in 2023. As noted in the committee notes, specifically the work around the Kaiser fish screen and the rubber dam number 3 ladder repairs. And we are continuing to work with our partner. If you recall, the Alameda County Flood Control District is our partner for the RD1 facilities, for the RD1 fish passage facilities, and we're working with them for their maintenance of the lower fish ladder, which is downstream of the Bart Weir. There's a significant amount of sediment in that portion of the ladder that needs to be. And we're continuing to make improvements not only in our facilities operations, but in our biological monitoring efficiencies through use of that new program, and continuing to validate that this year. So stepping back then for water supply planning, we do want to prioritize our local water supplies in 2025, and also make sure that we maintain compliance in our fish passage operations. We'll continue to monitor as water supply conditions evolve. This is December 2024, so this is the very first water supply update that we'll be providing. But we'll continue to provide updates through the board committee update process to keep the board updated. And we'll be looking at evaluating transfer opportunities. Obviously, if it's dry, those opportunities would be to secure additional supplies if there's a beneficial opportunity. And then if there are excess supplies, we'll be looking at potentially transferring to other willing buyers. And we'll make further advancements with the operation of our fish passage facilities as we continue to also make efficiency improvements with our biological monitoring. So this was a very quick update. Again, there are more details in the committee slides, but I wanted to provide the board with this fuller update on the work that the district staff is doing in both of these areas. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Too. You know what the high water flow was from the atmospheric event that we recently had?
The one recently, I could look that up for you. I want to say it wasn't high enough to reach 1200 CFS where we would have to lower our dams. I want to say it was in the 400 to 800, but I can look that up.
No, that's good enough for me to know. Just trying to compare it to when we had the previous big storms, where we got up to 27,000 CFS.
Yeah. The atmospheric river event in November was really not that significant.
Okay, good. And number two, isn't there any alternative technology for the camera where you don't get all that sediment buildup? Because I would bet that over time, as that is building up, you have degradation in the imaging of what you're trying to look for.
That's right.
Is there anything better?
Well, oddly enough, the technology we're using is state of the art. We're using one of the most advanced sonar cameras available, and in fact, when we looked at that processing software, we really are at the cutting edge, and it's hard to find other fish ladders that use this new technology as well. But I will say that even though the accumulation of sediment is a maintenance activity that's required, we are making significant improvements in the safe staff entry into that ladder. So the amount of time where the ladder shut down and staff needs to perform that maintenance operation was cut in half over the first year that we tried doing it. So it's a minimal impact to staff, and we are monitoring that image quality on a daily basis to make sure that we can schedule that entry well before that image quality begins to degrade to the point that the video is not useful.
Well, here's the thought, have a backup unit for the one that you're trying to clean, so you minimize the turnaround time and also for the safety of the workers. It's just a thought.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I understand we hired a consultant to help us in the startup and operations of the fish ladders. How long is that contract and how much was it for?
I don't have the exact number, the cost at the top of my mind right now. We can look that up and get back to you. It was a multi-year contract with an option to extend. So under all the extensions available under that contract, it would be a 5-year contract.
I'm sorry for the interruption here. As I recall, it was about 300,000 a year, and then we're spending probably a couple $100,000 a year in other staff. Would it be fair to say we're spending about $500,000 a year in the operation of fish ladders and labor and contracts?
I believe for the fisheries biologist consultant, I want to say it's roughly on that order, 300,000 the first few years of operation, as expected with the new facility and all the new permit requirements. That was always the expectation, that those costs would be high and that staff would be making operational and monitoring efficiencies to drive those costs down.
As I recall, Valley Water District eventually closed one of the recharge facilities they had near their headquarters, but they did come up with the plaque for the $1 million fish when they shut it down. So thank you.
Just one quick question from my side. On slide 12, you mentioned that we've made some improvements to district procedure in terms of how staff can get into the pools for maintenance and for cleaning the camera and all that. Can you give me a high level sense of what those improvements are and how, what would change procedure-wise?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And, as you know, the district's first priority is safety of staff. So we want to be sure that any operation that we do is protective of staff safety at all times. And part of this is our evolving understanding of this new facility, what requirements apply and which requirements don't apply in various situations. So when we did our first confined space entry to remove the camera at the end of 2023, we took a very conservative approach in what levels of safety and locking out and tagging out various components. As well as having a rescue team right there on hand to monitor the entire time. We also had other additional staff that were there with additional support equipment. Not exactly sure what may go wrong, and we wanted to cover all our bases. Once we got a couple of those operations under our belts, we realized that our initial approach was a little excessive. We didn't need all the staff that was there. And for example, the rescue team was deemed no longer needed to be right there on the premises for the entry. And so over time, we've reduced the not just the amount of time for that safe entry, but the amount of staff involved for that.
From a board member's perspective, obviously hearing about changes that help ensure safety of our employees. Just building on Director Sethy's questions on the camera as well, because I had kind of a similar thought process. When we're cleaning the camera, is it as simple as just running it under tap water and kind of wiping it clean, or is there a more rigorous cleaning process to it? Because that's a lot of sediment.
It's a lot of sediment, yeah. Yeah, no, it really is something as simple as that. And obviously, we don't have water service down at the bottom of the ladder, so we do carry down basically a spray jug like you'd use to spray liquid chemicals around your yard. We fill it with tap water. We take it down there and we open it up and we spray it off. And then they do have some basically paper towels that we can use, but usually just spraying it off has worked really well so far.
How frequently do you?
Well, we really weren't sure. The first year we knew that we were, in 2023, we knew we were losing image quality. And we also knew, because of the frequency and the size of the storms that we were seeing, that there was a lot of turbidity, a lot of suspended sediment in the water in 2023. So it didn't take very long for that thing to get full of sediment. This past year, 2024, was something more of an average year. So for us, it was really a good learning experience. We were able to go until early mid-April when we performed this entry. So that was most of the migration season, right? We just had another month and a half to go, but we made the call that it was starting to get a little bit grainy. We probably could have gone a little longer, but because we had confidence in our ability to go in there safely and perform that within an hour or two, we were able to go in April. So I would expect that on an average year, it may be once, maybe twice a year.
So I do have a curiosity question on slide 11. So you detected 51 pit tags, but only 37 of them went downstream. So what happened to the other 14?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. They gave her a raise. So
Turn back around.
We're working with our fisheries biologist consultant to put together our annual report for 2024. So that report will have a lot more detail than I have readily available. But in general, out of the 51, 37 were detected at both loops, and they were moving in a downstream direction. Now it's possible, the pit tag implanted in a fish, the fish needs to be basically going perpendicular through that antenna loop to ensure detection. It's possible the fish there, might have been slightly askew, going down maybe a little sideways. For any number of reasons, it wasn't detected at one of those two loops. So we maybe detected it at the upstream loop or the downstream loop, but not both. That doesn't mean it's still in the ladder. We've checked. It's been dewatered since then. There are no fish just hanging out. So some of them were only detected one time instead of twice. And for some of them, we actually did see some loitering, let's say, in the ladder where we had a fish that moved downstream and then decided to come back up and then maybe go back down again. So there was one individual that did seem to enjoy looking around.
I guess we made the ladder a little bit too cushy. No, there's a serious question behind it, right? The question is, do we need to change how we operate the ladder if it's an issue or something that we could address by putting more water through?
That's a good question. No, I don't think we're at the point right now where we have enough data to make any sort of recommendation like that. The ladder seems to be performing as designed. And, it's exceeding the expectations, in as far as its performance, and as frankly, the number of detections that we got this year was surprising, not just to staff, but to the resource agencies that we coordinate with. So, was seen as 51 tags was seen as an overwhelming success. And as this board knows, it did get quite a bit of media attention around mid-year. So, I think over time, we'll be able to evaluate that. When I did mention that there was one fish sort of loitering around, it was actually later in the season when conditions were not that great. It was not during the out-migration season where the bulk of these 51 were identified. So it wasn't a time of year where perhaps there were not better options for it. Again, I'm not a fisheries biologist, so I'm not going to speculate beyond that, but I think over time, especially in aggregate, as we get more data over multiple years, perhaps we'll begin to have a better understanding of those sort of questions.
Thank you.
Presentation, I always look forward to them.
I have a couple more questions. One is actually a request. There was a good article this past week in the Tri-City Voice about, on the front page, about the barrier in Sunol being, PG&E barrier being taken out, put underground and under the creek. It would be nice to have a future report on that project and how it's going, when they expect completion, things like that, how much it's costing. And the other is, remember when you and I, there were other people involved here too, were on a field trip to the upper Alameda Creek diversion fish ladders that were being built by San Francisco. Biggest fish ladders I've ever seen in my life. But it would be interesting to maybe get some feedback from San Francisco on the fish that are passing through there. I don't know if they have similar sonar equipment or what, but it'd be nice to know what's going on in the upper watershed as well as the lower watershed. And
Thank you.
Okay, next up would be our general manager's reports. We actually have two, only one on the agenda. The second one's very brief, but the first one is item 6.4.1, and that's our fiscal year 2023-24 popular annual financial report. That may sound a little new to the board, so to tell us all about it, we have Mr. Wonderlich.
All right, I have a not yet final draft over here with me, but the popular annual financial report is actually kind of the third of the formal financial documents that's kind of under GFOA programs. There's the budget and ACBR, which we've participated in for some time. But the purpose of a popular annual financial report is to really take the information in the ACBR and make it more accessible to your constituents who maybe are not financially inclined. I won't say that it's necessarily made really easy, but definitely easier and more accessible than the aquifer itself, where you have some more tables and graphics and a little more explanation about what each thing is within there. And so that's something that as staff we've talked about for a while, and we've been also receiving some board encouragement from our committee members to proceed with this. And so we are just about final, and once it's final, I will go ahead and share a copy with the board, and we'll also be submitting for kind of review by GFOA committees to make sure we're kind of hitting the mark in terms of the industry standards for this document. And so I just wanted to let the board know that this is coming. And welcome. Well, for this initial version, we have certain deadlines to meet, but certainly would welcome any board feedback on it that we can incorporate into future iterations.
Can we take a closer look at that at the finance meeting next week?
I don't know about next week, but we can certainly take a closer look in January. Because we're pretty much locked down for what's on the agenda for next Tuesday already.
Okay, that's fine. I am the one board member that has been pushing for this document. And I've been collecting them from around the industry and then forwarding them to finance team. Because in the old days of the water district, we actually did send out a slimmed down report. It's maybe like 8 pages or 10 pages that went out to every customer in the district. And I always thought that was a really good document, pictures of the employees and what they're doing. And financial presentation of the district and kind of easy to understand. And so I'm really looking forward to this, having this document available and circulating it in the community. Maybe we don't send it to every customer, but we can make them available in the libraries and other places around town, other government agencies.
All right, any other
And
comments?
there's another award for us to go after too.
It's within the industry, we call it the triple crown when you have the budget award, aquifer award, and PAFR award. So that's what we're going for, triple crown.
The finance department's insatiable desire for more and more awards where we are literally out of trophy case space. We've been out of space for a while. Okay, all right, next up is just a quick heads up about a public information meeting for the small diameter main renewal project that Mr. Awoke would like to share.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members and staff. As you may recall, the board approved 2 separate construction contracts in August of 2024. One was for the small diameter Lindsay Track main renewal project, and the other one was for the Dairy Avenue and Edge Street main renewal projects. Both of these projects are located within the city of Newark. I wanted to update the board that staff is finalizing plans to hold a public informational meeting in January of next year, January 13, 2025. The meeting will take place at the Newark Library, which is located at 37055 Newark Boulevard in Newark. The public meeting, we plan to provide an update on these projects as well as upcoming construction activities and answer any questions we may get from the public. I just thought I would share with the board and see if you plan to attend. If you wish to attend, let us know so we can notice the meeting appropriately. And that's my report. Sorry?
The date and time.
January 13, Monday, 2025, 6 p.m. at the Newark Library.
I can make that day.
Okay.
I'll try and make it as well.
Okay, so we'll notice the meeting appropriate. Thank you.
All right, that completes our general manager's reports for this.
6 p.m.
13.
Yeah, January 13, 6 p.m., Newark Library. And we'll actually send more information to the board before then. Okay. So now we're at director's comments and reports on meetings attended and agenda item requests.
So I'll start off here. 7.1. Actually want to give a 7.0 report, because I thought it was really a very important development for the entire water industry. And since I chair the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority, it's really important. So I watched the Met board meeting on Tuesday for two and a half, 3 hours, where Secretary Crowfoot gave a very nice presentation to the entire board, 38 members. 2 were absent from the meeting. And he also answered questions from the directors, all related to what amounted to a $142 million commitment to the Delta Conveyance project, 47% of the funding. So we approved at a recent board meeting our future participation in the project. And without Met's participation, everybody's kind of stuck, can't move forward. So the vote turned out to be nearly unanimous. There was one board member who voted no, but said he would have voted yes if Met had been able to negotiate a better deal with the state. Behind the scenes, and I shared a political article with Mr. Stevenson that came out that day, that morning, was the fact that many of the board members actually wanted to vote no. And at Aqua, I was talking to Randy Record, who was on the Met board, and asked him what was his feeling. He said it's really divided. We really don't know. But the member agencies that have their appointed representative on the Met board, most of them were supportive of the project, even if their representative was not. So the representative was instructed to vote the way that their individual boards did. And what was most interesting is that Director Weed and I were at a conference where we had an extended conversation with Tracy Quinn. Remember that? Save the Day, yeah, down there. And she was very opposed to Delta Conveyance project. And yet her board instructed her to vote yes, and then she turned around and she was the one who made the recommendation to approve the resolution. So the governor had put a lot of effort into backdoor channels to talk to each board member. And Secretary Crowfoot, Carla Nemeth, everybody was actively putting pressure on Met. And it's a sweet deal actually for Met, because they were disputing about $75 million in charges for other projects that they've worked on with the state. And the state is going to give them a refund by the end of next year. So they're putting up 142, they're getting back 75. But what we hope is that we're going to end up with a shovel-ready project at the end of 2 more years. So in 2027, that's the year when everybody's going to have to commit to the $20 billion. So I wanted to give that report. We have no DCFA meeting this month because everybody was waiting on pins and needles for this vote, which was delayed from August. And we will have a meeting in Sacramento in person in January. Second, the Mountain Counties Water Resources Association. You might be wondering why I'm going to something up in the Sierra foothills. Well, as Mr. Stevenson and Ms. Heides know, I've been working on a project to see how best we can protect the Feather River watershed. And that was the purpose of attending a couple of these headwater tours that I went on recently to go through the American, Tahoe, Yuba, and Feather River watersheds. And the fact is, the Feather River watershed doesn't have any active program for protection of the watershed. EWR doesn't even have a division devoted to it. So on a number of these field trips, I met with the State Fire Marshal, the California Department of Conservation, and a bunch of NGOs that are working on these kind of things. As well as Nevada Irrigation District has 265,000 acres of land that they own between Marysville, Nevada City, going all the way to the Nevada border. And Yuba watershed is managed by the Yuba Water Agency. Placer County Water Agency does their own work. And yet we're not doing it. So I am thinking out of the box here that we need to have like all 27 state water contractors pitch in a little bit of money to a fund that would feed into these NGOs. And the fire marshal and the lady who runs this conservation department, California, are both in agreement that this would be a really smart thing to do. Be proactive in protecting the watershed that serves 27 million Californians, provides water to 750,000 acres of ag land. So I got a lot of information, made a lot of new connections there. Got reinforcement from people I talked to previously. And as I mentioned earlier, we had a 1-hour presentation and Q&A with Representative Tom McClintock, which was really outstanding. He gave what I consider to be like a presidential address. I was really impressed with him. And if you don't know his background, he was elected chair of the Young Republicans at UCLA. 23, he became the head of the Republican Party in Ventura County. Elected to the Assembly at 26, where he served for a long time, and then state senator and congressman in office for over 40 years. Okay, that's my report. Those two items.
Okay, first of all, general comment, understand that OB money is going to sites. And anyone with any common sense will realize that sites doesn't work without Delta demands. And 75% of their customers are below the Delta. And Delta is going to become a particularly seasonal water supply, right? Not too good without those demands. The next thing we should be planning, if necessary, is a fallback as a seasonal water supply, as opposed to a year-round water supply. We don't get those demands. The conference, a couple of sessions, one in particular I'll comment on, which was on the very last day, a Region 5 conference that had representatives from Monterey, Pure Water, One Water, Valley Water District, and United Water District. Valley Water District, Aaron spoke. Conspicuous by its absence was any mention of desalination on the agenda plans of Valley Water, in spite of some discussions, promotion by their board to put a pilot desal plant. Second, on the Ventura plan, the day before, there's been a presentation which talked about the Freeman version down in Ventura, United. 1990, they had a handful of maybe 18 fish, but the cost per fish was $22 million. I noted in the presentation the next day that they had another $70 million for a hardening Freeman version. And it'll be interesting to see if they do that project, if they're able to find fish. Thank you.
So I will also report on the Aqua Fall Conference. I've mentioned before that conferences are really interesting, not just for the content of the sessions, but also the networking opportunity. On that front, this time around, I got to meet quite a few people from, well, Water Education for Latino Leaders. And that's an organization I've been familiar with before, but haven't really engaged with. But this time I got to meet probably a dozen members from WELL. It just seems like a very worthwhile conference to go to next time. And I know Directors Sethy and Judy have been part of WELL for quite some time, so excited to join them. In terms of content, obviously there were a lot of interesting sessions. The one that I'll just briefly talk about was on the Colorado River. And in that session, there were representatives from Colorado, Idaho, and California. And it slowly turned into, I guess, a little bit more commiseration over just how fraught politics have become, across the country. The representative from Idaho was talking a lot about how, well, the chambers are both heavily dominated by the Republican Party. There's heavy infighting between certain segments of the party, kind of reminiscent to what Jonathan Clay was talking about tonight with even here in the state. There's a lot of infighting despite one party being quite dominant. There's always a lot of tussling behind the scenes. Very funny, well, because I don't live in Idaho, it's funny to me. The story that came out of that was the governor and lieutenant governor are both Republicans, but are two different factions of the Republican Party. And at some point, the governor was on a trip visiting the border, and the lieutenant governor decided to usurp the role of governor and issue executive orders, basically taking over the governor's role for while they were out of state, which was just a really funny but fascinating story. But a lot of interesting parallels between what's going on in those states and then just how we're also seeing politics play out in the state of California as well. Colorado is obviously a purple state. They're having some fun challenges as polarization sets in. That starts to reflect in their negotiation parameters as well when it comes to the Colorado River. And so, yeah, that was, for me, one of the more fascinating sessions to listen. That's my report.
All right, so I am also reporting that for the Apple conference attendance. I attended a session titled Protect Yourself from a Rate Lawsuit. Specifically is on implementation of AB 2257. Originally, I thought this would be a new, more streamlined process that would protect the water district. After attending the session, I realized it's actually a parallel process in addition to our normal 218 process, and it further complicated the matter by drawing a distinction between a protest under 218 and an objection, I believe I used it correctly. So I am not sure if this is actually will work out for the district. So here's the ask. I will ask staff to look into it to see there has to be a cost benefit analysis here, right? It sounds like there's a lot more work in terms of procedural. How much work do we need to devote to implementing this new process, and how much protection is it giving to us, right? Because it basically put a clock on the time one could object, I guess, for lack of a better word. So that is one of the sessions, and I definitely said it, well, I said it on the Delta plan session. Apparently there will perhaps be a decision to adopt this plan in the next 6 months, and that my understanding is that different alternatives are still being evaluated, including a volunteer agreement and the 55% flow. which would have a very big impact to our water supply. So I know staff is constantly watching and monitoring it, so please keep on doing that. And I said in the same session as Director Weed on the drought water supply, it was definitely interesting to hear Valley Water, Monterey One, and United Water to talk about their proposed project. To take home for me, the projects they're proposing, you know what? We looked into it and we implemented them. So pat ourselves on the back. We're definitely a very forward-thinking agency, so thank you. Second thing is, I am surprised at the cost. Each agency, I didn't write down the cost for Monterey One for the recycle water project, but Valley Water is talking about $2.2 billion. United Water is talking about somewhere around a $1 billion worth project. We're talking about big B's now. I feel sorry for Valley Water's customers. I know the projects are required, but it's just, if you translate that into rate increases, the impacts to our customers in the future, or their customers in the future, will be pretty impressive. Hopefully, we're not looking at a project that's that expensive in any near future, but I think the water industry as a whole is changing. Instead of status quo, we're trying to be more forward-looking, and the price to pay for that is money. And yet another pat on our agency's back and the staff's back. We were forward-looking enough that we implemented some of these solutions to look for our drought water supply. In exchange for having that foresight, we don't have to discuss about projects that's costing billions. So thank you, staff, for having that foresight.
Just a quick note about AB 2257. Very aware of that. It's obviously brand new. Our friends at Union Sanitary District are using that process with their water or their wastewater rate cycle and proposal that's happening right now. So we're continuing to talk with them and watching what happens.
Are they following the process? I only remember getting 1 to 18 notice. I thought under AB 2257, you need to have a separate.
They've included instructions about filing written objections in their one notice that covers both. But like I say, it's brand new. And so we'll see if it turns out to be successful for them.
And absent from our discussion on that item this evening was any discussion of AB 2257. We are not following that process this time. We're waiting to see how it works for others. And then we also have a much more customer-friendly process with online protests that could significantly increase our workload compared to others. So we want to see how it goes, and then we'll consider it for the future.
We are very much thinking the sort of cost benefit
approach. Based on what I have heard or learned, I think there's a lot more boxes to check, a lot more process to follow, and the timing potentially could be an issue in terms of how much lead time you'll need to fulfill both process. So that definitely will impact our normal rate making process, right? From our discussions and workshops, so.
Time frames and so forth,
Yeah, so please monitor, thank you.
And then lastly, and you mentioned voluntary agreement, staff did testify to the water board. Today, there was a hearing related to the voluntary agreements. Our comments were exactly in line with the prior written comments that we've made on the voluntary agreements. Obviously, the district has a stake in that. And so, yes, we are following that very carefully and engaged.
Thank you.
I'll sum it up. First I went down, I did go down Tuesday to the Delta Conveyance meeting. Very pleased to see the room was full. We had a good number of our staff there, which is great. Zone 7 and Valley also had a large presence. I hope that was noted in the room by the others, because it shows, we're in this too. And there was a interesting meeting. You talk about the opportunities. I ran into a Met director. I was just able to, talk to him, just checking in. And, giving him a concept of what we went through. Obviously, our meeting significantly less than what they were facing. But to be able to tell somebody, we've gone through it, and we're there, we're behind you, we want you.
Yeah, I wasn't at that session.
Yeah, but this was just checking in, talking with this guy. And, just a happenstance meeting to be able to tell somebody who's gonna face the same thing on a much grander scale of, our concerns when we had the article. And what transpired in our meeting. And those little things are hard to measure. I went to the decade of Sigma, lessons learned. I like to follow Sigma. It's complicated. It's money. Who pays? There's still jurisdiction, there's still issues going on out there. And I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's still playing out. And so I will continue to go to those and watch that play out because I'm nervous about it. It can have implications for us. I don't think it will, but the potential is there. Probably need to stay in the room. Region 5, of course. Then I went to the balancing rates with sustainable infrastructure investment. Interesting stories poor people had to tell. Massive rate increases, failures of Prop 218s. It just made me feel better for what we've done and how we've addressed this, because these folks do, and they're paying the price. But to hear of actual Prop 218 failures, that's a pretty steep level to me, and they met it. Here we are even online, people saying, well, this never happens. Well, it does happen. And so we made some, I think, good moves in the past. And sitting in that meeting, you kind of look at yourself and say, I'm glad we did that. Because we're not behind the eight balls. These districts are at. So with that,
I have a short,
I went also with the Bay Delta as well, and I'd just like to say that was depressing. So that was probably the most depressing session, only because of, the voluntary agreements, the 55%. It's like, we need the Bay Delta.
so, I sat through 3 different committee meetings on Monday. They were all excellent. And on the local government committee, I just wanted to report what I did at the Aqua Region 5 session. Because we were working actively this past year on paving standards and on ADUs. And we had a presentation from an attorney at Best and Krieger who was going through all the nuances of the ADU laws that have been passed. Not one, it's multiple real estate laws. And so you have to know how to piece them all together in the right way. But not only was it highlighted that 25% or more of all new housing permits over the last 5 years have been ADUs, he noted that this year, 2024, is the first year ever where they have more ADU permits in San Diego County than regular residential units. Which is just shocking. To see this rising trend coming out of the blue. So I really do want to encourage our staff to engage with the three cities and with USD. We need to come up with some common set of rules that everybody can abide by in the Tri-City area. Second, the most interesting session I actually sat in on was on salmonids and the latest scientific evidence. I was sharing this with Director Wee too. It's really, what they're showing is that over the last 24 years, since 2000, that it doesn't really matter how much water you have going through the delta. The salmon are so imperiled that the idea of unimpaired flows, they were arguing, is not going to have any effect on salmon. They're directly challenging the environmentalists that are saying, you know, this is why we need the water, it's for the salmon. But they were reporting that all the way up on the Sacramento and San Joaquin River tributaries like the Stanislaus and the Tuolumne River, that when you go up to the furthest part of the tributaries, you have high density of salmon. And as they are developing the juveniles, they're coming down river. And by the time they're meeting the San Joaquin, they're at a tiny fraction of what they were upriver because they're being devoured by non-native invasive species. In particular, the black bass and the striped bass in the delta are just sitting right at the mouth of where all the salmon comes and just gobbling them up. It's unbelievable. They're decimating, the invasive species is decimating the salmon population. And the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which was called Fish and Game, supports the game fishermen who want to grow the bass to as large as you can for the prizes that they offer in competitions. And that this is really the opposite of what the state should be doing. And that in Oregon and state of Washington, they have unlimited catches on bass, whereas it's restricted here in California so that they can grow to a certain large size. And Oregon is doing exactly the opposite of California and trying to take out as many of the non-native invasive species from their river systems. And here in California, in fact, we have a similar program, but it does not include bass. It's for pikefish and all of these other non-invasives that people don't like. They were showing how they start you off with a $70,000 job just doing pikefish, but you can make up to $200,000 a year. And they have these boats with 5 guys that are making $1 million just catching non-native fish, delta and Sacramento rivers. So I think that's the one where I learned the most. And then I had a long conversation with Mr. Nizar, who kind of filled me in around the edges on some of the other issues that were going on. Last thing, I drove down, so I went on Highway 126 from Ventura to Santa Clarita, and I visited the Fillmore Fish Hatchery. You guys know I love fish hatcheries. So I went in unannounced and in a district vehicle, and everybody was curious, came out and wanted to know what ACWD is doing there. They were aware of the fact that we had some salmon coming up here and our fish ladder work. That fish hatchery was completed in 1942 specifically to raise warm water trout. which I didn't know. But they grow the best at 60 degrees. So they grow 700,000 fish there a year. They get the eggs from, or the hatched eggs from juvenile from another hatchery. But they grow 700,000 a year and then release those into Southern California lakes that have a little bit warmer temperature. That was really a fascinating tour when I was down there. My last report is on Los Vaqueros Reservoir, and I'll just simply say we met yesterday to start the process of dissolving JPA. We passed one resolution to terminate any more committee meetings and to start the process. So we'll meet in January and have a more detailed plan in place to kind of get everything going. But there's like 100 different action items on the list right now. So that's where we are. That's all, folks.
Looks like we're, next up is closed session.
All right, I'm happy to take you into closed session. It's now 9:17. The board is going to go into closed session for two different items. Item 8.1 is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, Amy Reeve, and Stacy Q. Employee organization is operator 3. Second closed session is item 8.2, also pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated negotiators for this closed session will be Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Amy Reeve. For unrepresented employees, management, confidential, and professional employees. Now convene into closed session.
Okay, time is 10:22 and 10:23. Call the meeting back in session. Council will read out the closed session.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The board convened in closed session for two items. The first item was 8.1, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated negotiators were Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, Amy Reeve, and Stacy Q. Employee organization, operating engineers local 3, and in that closed session, direction was given to the agency designated negotiators. The second closed session was for item 8.2, also pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. The agency negotiators in that closed session were Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Amy Reeve. For unrepresented employees, management, confidential, professional employees, and that closed session direction was given to the agency designated negotiators, and that concludes the open session reports.
And I believe we have only one more thing left this evening, and that is to pass on the. I gotta get it.
Are you handing it over or are you throwing it over?
Yeah, don't eat her on that.
Okay, very nice.
You have the second.
Outstanding. Congratulations. It is kind of like a stroke came out. Yeah, it's just bigger. Yeah.
It's just short.
I feel like you'll be happier to be further down there because you'll be safer.
Oh, gee. As long as you don't.
And the meeting is adjourned. Is the meeting adjourned?
Meeting is adjourned.
Meeting is adjourned.